was fast. It could have been one of the first political flashpoints of the new Trump era is over. And it ended not with a bang, but a bit of a whimper. Matt Gaetz withdrawing his nomination for Attorney General in a post saying this, quote, "There is no time to waste on the needlessly protracted Washington scuffle." His withdrawal comes after a day spent on Capitol Hill talking to Republican senators alongside J.D. Vance and amid a steady drip, drip, drip of seedy revelations out of the investigations into Matt Gaetz that would ultimately turn into a flood. The latest bombshell dropping just minutes after Gaetz withdrew. According to a source familiar with the matter, the House Ethics Committee was told that a woman had 2 separate sexual encounters with Matt Gaetz at the same party in 2017 when she was just 17 years old. CNN was first to report that news. They say that Gaetz withdrew his nomination just 45 minutes after CNN called to say that it was going to report on that 2017 incident. And just last night, the New York Times out with a bombshell piece of reporting of their own. They reported on findings by the Justice Department. A document obtained by the Times shows this, quote, "Federal investigators have established a web of payments among Matt Gaetz and dozens of friends and associates who are said to have taken part with him in drug-fueled sex parties. Among those who received money from Gaetz were 2 women who have testified that he hired them for sex. That's according to the document and a lawyer for the 2 women. The lawyer said payments to the women ultimately totaled around $10,000. The document does not show what the payments to the women were for, and NBC News has not independently verified the document. The DOJ probe into Gaetz ended without DOJ pressing criminal charges against Matt Gaetz, and Gaetz has denied any wrongdoing to both congressional and federal investigators. In a statement to the New York Times, Trump's communications director claims that the document was leaked by DOJ to smear Matt Gaetz. The campaign saying that it was classified, but the New York Times says there are no classified markings on the document, and there's no reason for a document like that to be classified. Questions remain about the fate of Trump's other nominees, and a new legitimate line of questioning rising up about Republicans and whether they'll oppose other unqualified picks. NBC News reports this, quote, "At least 5 Senate Republicans, Senators Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma, and Senator-elect John Curtis of Utah were a no on Gaetz and had communicated to other senators and those close to Trump that they were not likely to be swayed." Matt Gaetz withdrawing his nomination is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt joins us. Also here, former SDNY Criminal Division Deputy Chief Kirsty Greenberg's back. Democratic strategist Basil Smikle is here. And former RNC spokesman, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here. Lucky for us, they're all MSNBC contributors. Tim Miller, I start with you because we were wrong. We were wrong. You and I said Matt Gaetz will be the Attorney General. Trump wants to see how low he can go. Apparently, the answer to how low he can go is whatever's sort of above Matt Gaetz and, I don't know, below Pete Hegseth. I don't know. But it is interesting when you find out what a bridge too far for Donald Trump looks like. Apparently, it looks like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, the Gaetz eyebrows maybe are the low watermark for him. We were wrong about this, though. The wrongness was based on how these senators will act, right? And Matt Gaetz let them off the hook by withdrawing, right? He didn't force any of those 5 names. Though Lisa Murkowski was pretty public, in fairness to her, but she didn't force any of the other 4 to have to actually vote against him. And I think that will be the question, is where the rubber meets the road on that stuff. It's interesting. Gaetz may have decided to withdraw for other reasons. He might have not wanted the additional details about the apparently 2 encounters with the 17-year-old or the other payments that the New York Times reported on. I think that remains to be seen. I think a big test of that, like of our thesis, which was that these senators will fold to Trump, will be Hegseth and RFK. For a fact that Mitch McConnell given his past and his commitment to the polio vaccine, is not at all interested in an anti-vaxxer leading HHS. Will he actually stand in the way of RFK Jr.? That'll be one test. And Pete Hegseth will be the other test. Will these same senators stand in the way of him? That Pete Hegseth is not in any meaningful sense more qualified than Matt Gaetz. He's less qualified, actually. He also has scandal in his private life and accusations, allegations of sexual assault. There's a police report that was just out today about the detailing those allegations. And so, there's no difference between Hegseth and Gaetz. So the question is, which one of these nominees will Trump actually put muscle behind? Maybe none. And if he does stand behind the rest of them, will these senators actually show backbone when they have to in public? I think that remains to be seen.
Mike Schmidt, take us inside what the revelations that you reported last night. Take us inside the picture that was emerging of Matt Gaetz.
So what was significant about what we reported is that over the past few days, a lawyer for two of the women who said they had sex with Gaetz for money has been out there on television. He's been saying that they testified about that and that this indeed happened. And when we obtained this document from inside the federal investigation of Gaetz, it showed that Gaetz had sent the two women thousands and thousands of dollars in money. So it was bolstering the credibility of these different witnesses. And what you had at that point was a situation in which whether the House Ethics Committee report was going to come out or not, if Gaetz's nomination moved forward, he was going to be in a situation where he had one of three choices. He was going to be asked under oath, did you ever pay women for sex? And if he said no, the Democrats were going to point to the testimony from this lawyer and other documentation like this Justice Department document that we had and said, look, that's not true. You could be lying under oath. If he admitted to it, it would have created a different firestorm of it all. Or the third option, which would have perhaps been the most extraordinary, is that he could have taken the Fifth Amendment. And he could have taken the Fifth Amendment and not answered the question. And you would have had a situation in which the incoming Attorney General was taking the Fifth Amendment about his actions that were looked at in a Justice Department investigation, a Justice Department in which he was going to be taking over. And Senate Republicans were going to have to basically determine who was telling the truth. And it would have been, a time for them to say, OK, Matt Gaetz, you're either lying or you're not lying. And by stepping aside, he avoided that situation. And to what Tim was saying, now the Senate Republicans, you will not have to see how they will, they were going to publicly deal with this.
Mike, Joel Greenberg is serving 11 years in jail. And one of the things that he was charged with was sex trafficking of a minor. Is that the same person that Matt Gaetz is alleged to have had sex with, based on CNN's reporting, 2 times?
No, both Matt Gaetz and Joel Greenberg told federal authorities that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl and that he saw Gaetz have sex with a 17-year-old girl. During the federal investigation, authorities learned that Gaetz had sex with a 17-year-old girl 2 times over the span of a day in 2017. In one of those encounters, another adult woman participated in what was going on. I'm not sure how much that changed things. We already knew that Gaetz had been, that the authorities had learned that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl. Another instance of that, obviously, sort of bolsters the idea that it happened. But at the end of the day, Joel Greenberg pled guilty to having sex with a 17-year-old girl who he knew was being paid for that. He was facing a 10-year mandatory minimum because of that. He received more than a 10-year sentence. Gaetz was never indicted. Had he been indicted on that same charge and had he been convicted, he would have faced a mandatory 10 years in prison. But obviously, the department never charged him. And there's obviously a lot of questions about that, questions that we don't have really good answers to about why the department didn't charge him.
I guess what's interesting, Kirsty, is that there's so much in the public. I mean, and it becomes, and this may sound so old-fashioned, but it becomes about the flagrant lack of character. Right, you've got this guy sitting in prison, charged with the same crime at allegedly some of the same parties. You've got a lawyer for two women who is describing the women as having zero political, I think his quote was, dog in the fight, but who saw him have sex with a woman who was 17 at the time. You've got this new revelation that he actually had sex with a 17-year-old twice in one night. You've got a Republican senator, one of the no votes, saying that he would crush ED drugs, chase them with energy drinks so he could go all night long, which is just a portrait of, even in the Trump era, an unbelievable lack of care. I mean, you know what the word is, morals, character. It seems like he was so bad that it wasn't even about the non-charged activity.
Well, I think you have a lot of this, as you said, which was known. It's been known for years that women have accused Matt Gaetz of paying them for sex. And so now we have more meat on the bones. We have these payments where it's showing Matt Gaetz making a payment. One of those payments said it was for tuition reimbursement, showing, I think, consciousness of guilt. He's looking to conceal what this was really for. The way they found these women was on a sugar daddy's website. You have more information about the fact that they're traveling across state lines. Mm-hmm. There are a multitude of federal crimes here that it seems like there is strong evidence. We don't know why DOJ didn't pursue it, but there's certainly strong evidence. Just knowingly transporting adult women across state lines for the purpose of prostitution, that is a federal crime. That is one of the crimes that P. Diddy is charged with right now out of SDNY. And even with respect to the minor, sex trafficking of a minor, even if he didn't know at the time that she was 17, you actually don't need to prove that as a prosecutor in order to make that stick. You just need to show there's reckless disregard of her age, that he had a reasonable opportunity to observe her. And you have, again, the women, you start with the women who are corroborating each other. And then you start with the documents, the travel records, the payments. And when you have Matt Gaetz actually making these payments, not just one payment here or there, but thousands of dollars in payments, suggesting this was happening for many occasions, suggesting it was happening over years. I mean, this is, if it's not criminal, it's hard to see how at a minimum it wouldn't be a state crime. It is illegal to solicit prostitution in the state of Florida. So it's hard to see how he wasn't hit with something here. And this Joel Greenberg, his associate, who is, as you mentioned, serving a sentence of 11 years in prison for the same conduct, trafficking of a minor, he said during his plea, I didn't know she was 17. He's still in jail for that. And the judge said that his cooperation, Joel Greenberg's cooperation against many individuals, not just Matt Gaetz, but his cooperation was among the most significant he had seen in 22 years on the bench. So he gave up the goods on Matt Gaetz. I don't know that. That's under seal. But I know that because otherwise, based on what was public, it doesn't quite make sense. So there is a lot here. And knowing how much there is here, knowing how much has been public for so long, the fact that Donald Trump decided this was going to be his top cop is an absolute disgrace. And the only reason he isn't because Donald Trump had second thoughts. Oh, gee, it's so terrible that he did these things. No, it's because he couldn't get him confirmed because some of the senators had a spine, which maybe he wasn't counting on.
A spine or an ego. Let me show you all the bad things that Matt Gaetz said about the people who were asked to vote for Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. This was compiled by our friends at The Beat.
We have Murkowski and Collins rejecting the duties that they have as senators, and if they do that, their voters should reject them. Our leadership, frankly, is in shambles. You've got McConnell wavering.
Speaking of fools, Republican Senator and neoconservative Markwayne Mullin, Mitch McConnell's real legacy is that he was missing in action when we needed him most, and spent a lot of his time in the Senate putting special interests above American interests. My advice going forward is that the Republican leadership doesn't need to pick one of the Johns. John Thune, John Cornyn, John Barrasso. I think that there are going to be better options than the Johns. Senator Tillis trying to get another blank check for a corrupt country. It's disappointing. There's a certain hubris to all of it.
I remember the speaker, the hearings or the votes when Kevin McCarthy was trying to be speaker. and the anger and frustration that his colleagues showed toward Matt Gaetz.
Didn't they get in a physical fight at one
he
point?
rolled up on him like he was in the street. It was, I'd never seen anything like that on the floor of the House. And so it's clear that there
I don't think
no
I've
level.
ever said, let's stay in the House Republican caucus, though.
Right. There clearly is no love lost with respect to the Republican senators and members of the House for Matt Gaetz. No love lost. But to both points, Donald Trump has a fairly high threshold for pain and shame. That's not the case for everybody else. That there is some measure of shame and tolerance for blowback that senators and House members cannot withstand because they are regularly elected or in front of the people, number one, with respect to elections, but they just like their jobs and they actually take, I may have some issues with this from time to time, but take their jobs seriously, right? And so it strikes me as just amazing that this person could be the head law enforcement official in our country. But look at the way they talked about Kamala Harris during this campaign. This is the DEI potential president. I mean, it's just so striking. But again, Senator Cornyn last week said that they didn't want to embarrass Donald Trump, so it was important that this information get out, and said recently, it's likely because it's DC, it's going to come out anyway. Even if they didn't want to do it for Donald Trump, they did this for themselves. They made sure that at least they could go back and not have to deal with the sordid details that are coming out. Who wants to continue to talk about this as a senator when you got other things on your plate?
Up next for us, Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse joins this very conversation. I'm sure he's thrilled. We are all back, and joining our conversation is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island. He is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, I apologize for the seediness of today's lead story, the subject of Matt Gaetz, but do you feel, I feel sort of a weird combination specific to the time of Trump of relief and deep anxiety about like what was in the box that Matt Gaetz's name came out of, right? Like there was obviously a hat out which came names like Todd Blanche and Mr. Clayton and people who were normal enough. And then there was another hat and the name Matt Gaetz came out of that hat. What do you think is behind Matt Gaetz?
It's very hard to tell. Certainly nothing that's very sane or normal. I think when you want to install as the chief prosecutor of the United States of America, somebody whose only experience with criminal investigations is to be the subject of one, you have really departed from the most fundamental guardrails of normalcy. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and God bless them, sufficient Republican senators sent the message back to the White House that this can't fly, that they ended up withdrawing. I think, a piece of this has been a challenge to the Republican senators by the Trump administration, sort of daring them. There's the legend of the foreign potentate who had the door to his reception chamber built 2 feet high, so everybody had to come in at a crawl. This was kind of a crawl test for Republican senators to have to eat awful nominees like Gaetz and Gabbard. And so, the crawl test continues, but it's kind of reassuring that enough Republican senators were willing to be part of the stand-up cohort and not the crawl cohort. And I hope that continues for some of these other appalling nominees.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting observation because in the time of Trump, there is a sort of rinse and repeat dynamic. Trump is appalling. They avoid our cameras for 36 hours, and then, that's what the people want. I wonder if you think it's worth wondering whether strength can be a cycle as well, whether drawing a line could beget more lines being drawn with people like Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, I think that the Trump administration took a surprisingly strong hit here. Think of the past 48 hours with J.D. Vance, our senator's colleague and soon to be vice president, bringing people into his office with Matt Gaetz for come to Jesus sessions to try to pressure them into signing up for a completely unpalatable candidate. And then immediately thereafter, he's withdrawn.
Yeah.
So the kind of atmosphere of threat and intimidation and pressure and inevitability has been shattered already. And I suspect there's a bit of resentment brewing from those personal conversations. And now that it's been shown that it didn't work, then, so much the better. So to all my Republican colleagues who stood up and made it clear to the White House that this wasn't going to happen, bravo them.
It's important, right, to call that out when it does happen, even though it's rare. It doesn't diminish the fact that at a moment when a lot of the narrative, I'm not sure that it's deserved, is about Trump's political strength. When it came to Matt Gaetz, found their spines. I want to read you, to your point about the meetings that J.D. Vance is orchestrating, this was the pitch for Matt Gaetz. This is reporting in the Bulwark. So this is what Matt Gaetz said to senators, quote, "Look, I'm not going to go there and indict Liz Cheney, have stormtroopers bust through the studio door at MSNBC and arrest Anthony Fauci in my first week," Gaetz told some senators in his one-on-one meetings, according to two people familiar with them. It's that last clause, quote, "in my first week," that sounded like an ominous disclaimer to some, and it prompted a few senators to ask with a laugh, what happens thereafter? To which he said, quote, "We're not doing that." Donald Trump's AG nominee then said, quote, "We're breaking the cycle of weaponizing DOJ." I guess the problem with that is that men like Bill Barr had a hard time stopping Donald Trump's desire to use the IRS and use the Department of Justice against Trump's enemies. That Trump was relentless in this request. And do you think that it is? Do you think that it is a prerequisite for whoever replaces Matt Gaetz atop the Department of Justice that they be willing to do retribution as it's been short-termed?
It would not surprise me, but can we start with the beginning big lie in all of this, which is the question of whether DOJ was weaponized? The question of DOJ being weaponized, and for instance, New York prosecutors and Georgia prosecutors all being part of some weaponization thing, is simply the counter narrative to the fact of the matter, which is that Trump is a criminal. And if who got caught and had to do all sorts of wheedling and weaseling to get out of it where he could, and in other places was either found guilty or found liable. So, behind all of this is an effort to scrub out the underlying fact that the guy that they're supporting, the head of this cult, is in fact a criminal. And when you can't admit that, you've got to go after the prosecutors, and then you get into this cascade of rhetorical consequence that opens up the door for turning that office into the actual weapon that you're pretending it was against Trump.
We're going to need you often, Senator, to sort of continue to remind us where the norms are and when we're blowing right through them. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for including me.
They do impact readiness. They make us better. They make us stronger. And again, what I've seen from our women is quite incredible. And I'm not, this is not hyperbole. This is fact. I'm just telling you what I've seen. And I think, as the years have gone by, our women get better and stronger.
That is our current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, on the value and the strength of the brave women who serve this country and put their lives on the line every day, what they bring to the United States military, a direct contradiction from what we heard Donald Trump's pick to replace him say about 2 weeks ago.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women, and they're great. Mm-hmm. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
That was, of course, Fox News weekend morning show host Pete Hegseth, currently the choice to be Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense. He's now facing an escalating battle to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Senators from both political parties having concerns over comments like those we just played, and over the fact that Hegseth confirmed he paid a woman who accused him of sexual assault years ago, although he denies the assault occurred. Politico reports this, quote, Republicans have downplayed and deflected when asked about Hegseth, arguing Trump picked an outsider to shake up the Pentagon bureaucracy, or that the confirmation process should play out. Trump's team is apparently feeling the heat over this nomination. Vanity Fair reporting that according to two Republicans close to Trump, the transition team is quietly preparing a list of alternative defense secretary candidates should Trump abandon Hegseth. Meanwhile, NBC News finds that Trump's team is working to accelerate efforts to name a reliable deputy secretary of defense to calm nerves and stabilize Hegseth's nomination fight. That's according to two officials familiar with that planning. I want to bring into our conversation Iraq War veteran Senator Tammy Duckworth, a Democrat of Illinois. Senator, thank you for being here with us. We are marveling, I guess is the word for it, at where we are as a country and perhaps in a presidential transition where the pick in the year 2024 to lead the Department of Defense is openly advocating to remove all women from combat roles in the military, which, of course, is an affront to folks like yourself who served honorably. They've given more to this country than the vast majority of the rest of us, but also seems to seek to erase the contributions of women in the military. What are your thoughts about this?
You know, America's Daughters is just as capable of defending liberty and freedom as her sons. And I would hate, you know, I have two daughters, but if I were the mom of sons, I would be offended that you would think that my son's life is less precious than your daughter's lives. Frankly, this is about doing the job, and the women who have passed the qualifying test, whether it's to be an Army Ranger or a helicopter pilot like I did, this is the ability to do the job and defend our nation that we love. And frankly, for Mr. Hegseth to say that women should not be in combat really shows his lack of understanding of what modern combat is like. There's no forward line that you hide behind, that you can stay behind, you know, and say, okay, over here on this side of the line you're in combat, but on this side you're not. If you were in the green zone in Baghdad, you were in combat, whether you were a supply clerk or whether you were an infantryman. Frankly, it doesn't even reflect the realities of modern warfare.
The campaign feels like it happened 11 years ago, but it's only been 2 weeks. The country has elected someone who was on the record, in the telling of his own former chief of staff and general, as believing that the men and women who died and were injured serving their country were, quote, suckers and losers. What does it mean, in your view, that the country elected that person?
Well, I'm disappointed, obviously. I continue to believe that Donald Trump is not qualified to be the commander-in-chief of our nation's military. And it shows in his decision with his proposed defense secretary nominee. But that said, I believe strongly in the democratic process, and Donald Trump won the Electoral College and he won the popular vote. And if I were in uniform today, I would salute and carry out all lawful orders, but not the unlawful ones. And I think that we need to make sure that we keep the checks and balances of our system in place. And that's why here in the Senate, we need to step up and do our job and provide that oversight of the executive branch that our founders entrusted upon us.
How much would you wager that any sort of real and earnest and thorough process, absent fear of political retribution from Donald Trump, will take place when it comes to Trump's nominees to a future cabinet at, say, the Pentagon or the Department of Justice?
Well, I have to tell you that I am not optimistic that my Republican colleagues, once they take the majority, won't roll over for Donald Trump. But I would hope that there are signs from the Republican election of Senator Thune to be their leader, somebody that Trump did not want to be the Republican leader, that maybe there's a little bit of backbone left, maybe a few vertebrae left on the Republican side of the Senate, but we'll see what happens there. We do know that Donald Trump is about retribution. He is about enacting revenge. That's not what we want in a president, but certainly let's hope that some of my Republicans colleagues remember their oath, which was not to Donald Trump, but it was actually to protect the Constitution of the United States.
Donald Trump, in a first term, according to his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, sought to court-martial General Stanley McChrystal and Admiral William McRaven for being critics of his. He has promised the same punishment for people like General Milley and others. What would that do to the military if he were to follow through on those threats?
Well, I think if he were to try to follow through, I would hope that our military officers who would convene such a court-martial would oppose it. This is where you get to the unlawful order. As military officers, you're not supposed to carry out unlawful orders. So I would hope that the members of the military, each and every one of whom have dedicated their lives to defending this nation and our Constitution, would remember the all enemies, foreign but domestic, and stand up to Donald Trump and not allow that to happen. I think that there are enough good officers out there who would not carry out an unlawful order, and I would have to have some trust in the military that they would do so.
Would it create a standoff, though? I mean, what would that be like for them?
It would probably end their careers. But at a certain point, you got to decide, do you owe allegiance to Donald Trump, or do you owe allegiance to this great nation that you have worn the uniform of and swore an oath to defend? And I hope that they remember that their allegiance is to the United States of America, not any one individual.
Senator Tammy Duckworth, it's extraordinary that we're even having this conversation, but thank you for having it with us. When we come back, the election's real-world impact on all of us, but especially the lives of women, many of whom are now stockpiling abortion medication and morning after pills ahead of Donald Trump's inauguration. We'll explore the growing fears over access to reproductive health care in this country next.
One of the groups opposing you says this: he wants a total abortion ban with no exceptions. He supported bans that would not only criminalize abortion, but ban IVF treatments and common forms of birth control, and that you voted against access to contraception. Where are you on these issues? Is that an accurate assessment of where you are? Because that's not in step with the American people.
No, Shannon, look, I'm pro-life. I've said very clearly, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I believe in the sanctity of every single human life.
House Speaker Mike Johnson has let the mask slip since then when it comes to his views on all those issues. He's just one of the many opponents to reproductive health care and access to abortion health care who will be all the more empowered after Donald Trump is sworn in for a second term in office. So it is no surprise that women across the country are taking them literally and preparing for the worst. New York Times reports this, quote, across the country, some women are ordering emergency contraceptives, abortion pills, or both. WISP, a telehealth provider of medications for reproductive health, said that during the 5 days after the election, it sold more than 10,000 Plan B pills, which do not require a prescription. It sold fewer than 5,000 pills in the same Wednesday through Sunday span the week before the election. For their part, anti-abortion groups are preparing wish lists of restrictive policies they believe a Trump administration will fulfill for them, from attacking contraception access to policies that would restrict all abortions. The Guardian reports this, quote, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America's president, Marjorie Dannensfeller, indicated that her group would work to lay the groundwork for fetal personhood, a legal doctrine that would grant embryos and fetuses full legal rights and protections, quote, in order to go on offense and truly defeat the abortion industry in the long term, we must strengthen the pro-life, pro-woman, pro-family resolve of the Republican Party, centered on the unalienable right to life for the unborn child that exists under the 14th Amendment, she said in a strategy memo issued earlier this week. Joining our conversation, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund, Alexis McGill Johnson. Michelle is back with us as well. Alexis, when you look at the states where the voters said, I want abortion to be legal in my state and I want Donald Trump for president, how have you sort of over the 2 weeks of having that information available to you, how have you made sense of that?
Look, I think that the only mandate that Donald Trump got on election night was to keep a national abortion ban off of our bodies, right? He knows, the president-elect knows that abortion won on election night in all of those states that you mentioned, whether it's Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, New York, across the spectrum. Even in Florida, abortion was more popular than the president-elect. And I think what that means to us, right, is that people voted to ensure their own bodily autonomy in those states. And we always knew that, you know, abortion rights are popular and nonpartisan across the board. You don't vote to overturn a ban in Missouri just by winning on Democratic votes. You don't win constitutional amendments in states like Kentucky and Montana and Ohio without ensuring that Republican and independents come across the board. Those are many of the same people that Planned Parenthood also sees, right? The millions of people that come to Planned Parenthood health centers every single day, they are also, bipartisan. They are also people who come from all walks of life seeking basic access to health care.
I mean, Alexis, abortion access is more popular than Donald Trump is a non-deniable reality-based statement. And I wonder if it makes anybody on the abortion healthcare access side contemplate a meeting down in Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump, who I think the right understands he's totally untethered and unmoored to any principle and policy. And the right seems to pump that for the most extreme and insane things that they want. I mean, fetal personhood is so radical, that's what jeopardizes IVF for any family struggling with infertility. But I wonder if you think there's any sort of Hail Mary effort to go and talk about his promises not to do the most extreme things and some of his utterances on the campaign trail.
Look, Donald Trump gave his promise to the American people. He said he reversed his record and said that he would not ban abortion, and Planned Parenthood Action Fund is going to hold him accountable to that every single day for the next 4 years. I grew up, your word is your bond. We are going to interpret any attempt to block access to abortion, to block access to mifepristone through backdoor, executive orders, or any attacks on Planned Parenthood for that matter, with failing to keep a promise to the American people. And so we feel as though we need to just ensure that he understands we are taking him at the current word that he has, which is that he would not ban abortion, would not be looking for a national abortion. And that is our job to ensure that, hold him to that.
Michelle, of all of the sort of disappointment that Democrats and the pro-democracy coalition felt on election night, the bright spot is what Alexis is describing. The abortion access measures in Arizona, Missouri, New York, even Florida, where garnered 57% of the electorate in Florida. It is undeniable that access to abortion health care has the support of the majority of the American people. That's not where the Supreme Court is. That's not where J.D. Vance is. Do you think that this is sort of, at least as we head into the administration, a friction point, or do you believe that Trump will be overrun by the extremists in his own administration?
I believe it is a friction point, and it's in part because Alexis said that she heard a promise. People on the other side who are against abortion feel like they heard a promise too. And they feel like their promissory check is coming back with insufficient funds, that they are not getting what they thought that they were going to get from Donald Trump. And so they're absolutely going to go to war, and they're going to continue to fight for this. I mean, in the same way that they tried to regulate clinics out of existence under Roe, they will try to regulate access to abortion pills out of existence in a post-Roe world. And they'll use several ways to do this. They'll try to do this in the legislature. They'll try to do this in the courts. They'll try to withhold funding from universities that are prescribing anti-abortion pills. They'll try to make it difficult for people to access them through telehealth. So yes, it absolutely is a friction point and will continue to be. You know, the other bright spot, though, that Democrats may find in the sort of dichotomy of people voting to support abortion rights and also supporting Donald Trump, and some of the polling that was done to gauge where people were at, specifically in some of these states that had referendums on the ballot, one of the things that people said is that they trusted Democrats more to handle health care issues. And going forward, that is something that will help the Democratic Party as this fight continues.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.